Fire away.
Hello, everyone. I believe we are recording now. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us for Martin Waymire's Polling the Pollsters event. We thought with just 2 weeks left until the election, we'd hop on the video with 3 of Michigan's top political pollsters. So thank you so much for the 3 of you for joining us today. It's been kind of a hectic time. Not really sure how to categorize it, even though, we work in communications here at Martin Waymire. Unprecedented, historic, unsettling, and contentious, I guess, are some of the words that have been used recently. But I'm just so glad that everybody could join us here today. I'm Elizabeth Battiste. I'm a senior account executive with Martin Waymire, and I'm just excited to be here to talk about what has changed since the 2016 election and how some of our state's key races are shaping up for November 3rd. We have a lot of eyes on us here in Michigan, and I know that the 3 gentlemen that have joined me today have been making the national media circuit, so we're just very grateful to have them here. I just wanted to give some quick intros. We have Paul King, president of ROI Insight. He's been at it for 25 years and has provided clients with research, analysis, and expertise to provide the wisdom needed to compete and thrive in a world of perpetual evolution. Some years are evolving quicker than others, as we've learned in 2020. Paul's an award-winning researcher and strategist, helping clients measure and influence public opinion and audience motivators. Many of you may know Paul as a longtime pollster for the Marketing Resource Group, where he worked on a variety of political and policy clients. Clients at ROI have included Coalition to Protect Auto No Fault, Macomb Community College, Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, the Michigan Business Network, Michigan Future, Accident Fund, Fly Lansing, and more. So quite a long list of clients there. Welcome to the call, Paul.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And we also have Steve Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Research and Communications, joining us, a full-service national public affairs, public relations, advocacy, and marketing research firm with offices in Detroit and Lansing. Steve has worked for corporations, associations, ballot committees, political candidates, government agencies, and the media for over 25 years. And his team has previously worked with the Michigan Association of Health Plans, Michigan Chamber of Commerce, the Michigan Freedom Fund, the House Republican Campaign Committee, the cities of Detroit and Southfield, and many, many more. So thanks for being with us today, Steve. We really appreciate it. And last but not least is Bernie Porn with EPIC-MRA. He has been at it for over 3 decades, and he leads the firm over at EPIC-MRA, primarily doing the writing and analysis of the survey research. He's looked to by members of the media, academia, and others for commentary. He's been one of the top ranked polling firms from 538. So we're proud to have him as a Michigan-based pollster that gets some national attention. And he's worked for a number of years on the Democratic House candidates. And he also works today with a variety of firms across the spectrum, much like our other guests, with K-12 education and intermediate school districts, community colleges and universities, transportation authorities, government agencies, hospital and healthcare providers, and the list goes on and on. So thank you again, all 3 of you, for being here, and I hope that covers it. If I left anything out, feel free to give yourself a plug.
Covered the waterfront.
We're good.
Perfect. Well, I just want to, set the stage a little bit. All eyes, like I said, are here on Michigan. Just to kind of set the tone a little bit, we already know that we've set a record of how many absentee ballots have been requested in this state. How are you measuring what ballots have been cast already, and what is the progress going to look like between now and Election Day? I guess, Paul, if we can start with you.
Well, I just actually been talking to some of the folks behind the scenes that are, in the parties that are looking at some of the ballots coming in, and just like you said, the number of ballots that have gone out is astounding, but the number of votes that have already come in is also astounding. I think as of Friday, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was right around 1.5 million return ballots already, which is pretty exceptional. And some of the numbers that I'm seeing, the Democratic consultants behind the scenes are saying that they're seeing that their numbers, the houses that their numbers make up, or the houses that they're targeting, make up about 60% of the return ballots, which is pretty astounding if you look at it. So, I think obviously these numbers are going to continue to skyrocket as we get closer to the election, but it is important to keep that in mind, that election day isn't in 2 weeks. It's right now. It's happening. Everyone's voting right now. So
election season, definitely.
Yes,
Steve,
for
were
sure.
you trying to say something? I'm sorry. I think you might have been on mute.
I put it on mute for just one moment, but
okay.
I'm back on now. So.
Okay, great.
But if you'd like me to respond to that question, one of the things that we do in our polling is we ask people if they've already voted, if they're definitely probably vote, not sure yet, or definitely not voting. We don't poll them if they're definitely not voting, but that way we can track how they're doing, and we can determine how much of the vote is coming in so far. Right now, the vote that is coming in is very heavily Democratic, because Democrats plan to use early voting or absentee voting to a much greater degree than Republicans. And so I think you have the potential on election night, because so many of the Republicans will be voting on election day or right prior, that it's going to look like a huge victory for Trump. And then everybody's going to have to sit waiting as the absentee votes are counted. Then it's going to start moving pretty quickly in the other direction.
Sure.
And we have the same issue in our polling. We ask whether or not they have already voted. And when we did our poll about a week or so ago, is 28% saying that they had already voted. And Steve, I noticed that in your poll, I think when you asked it just like yesterday, I think you had 33% saying that they had already voted. And we had 66% of those who said they had already voted saying that they were Democrats. And there was a study done by LE2, I believe, suggesting that of those ballots that have already been turned in, that about 68% are voting by absentee ballot, which means that on election night, as you had pointed out, Trump supporters should not feel overconfident because their guy will be leading, and Democrats should not feel suicidal because their guy is trailing, and it is not 2016 again, and I'm quite sure it will not be 2016 again.
Right.
So we have a question from Matt Bach in the chat here that kind of ties into what we're talking about right now. What do you think is a reasonable amount of time for voters to expect the results will take to process? Are we talking hours, weeks, days, somewhere in between? What's your best guess on that?
I think we'll know certainly, I think by the end of Wednesday, we'll know for sure, maybe earlier, maybe Thursday, but not into Friday, as I think some people have been predicting.
Anybody else, or is there a general agreement on that?
I think that Secretary of State Benson said that it would not be unreasonable to expect that the job of counting the absentees might last through Friday. I don't think it will last that long, and it all depends on to what extent there is a lead. If the polling is right and Biden has a lead, why it will be closer than expected in the election day voting, even though our numbers show that about 61% of those voting on election day are likely to be Trump supporters. If it is much closer than that, and then as the absentees come in, it shows a strong Biden lead, where then I think it can probably be declared before all of the ballots are counted. But that assumes that there's not going to be a repeat of 2016.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's all about setting expectations, and as far as the Secretary of State's concerned, and I would agree. I think everything should be pretty much wrapped up by Thursday. I can't imagine it going much longer than that.
Well, let's jump right into some of the biggest races coming up in the state. Obviously, President Trump narrowly won Michigan in 2016. Do you think there's even a slight possibility of that happening? I mean, I know the general building consensus with polls is not looking like it, but that's kind of what we thought in 2016 too. How do you see the presidential shaking out?
Who wants to start?
I will gladly start off this one. In 2016, we were not unhappy with our poll. As a matter of fact, when we had an 11-point lead for Hillary, and then the 9/11 health scare that she had dropped down to a 3-point lead, and right then I knew that there was a potential of her support eroding. Then she was back up to about 11-point lead during the debates. And then after the WikiLeaks, it dropped down to a 7-point lead. And then with 1 week to go, it was a 4-point lead, and that was only 42-38 with a huge undecided. That is not the case now. You do not have a huge undecided. Our last poll had 48-39. I think that was 1 point off from what Siena College had at 48-40. And we had Trump leading by 2 among men and among 18 among women. And that was, I think, 1 point off from that Siena College poll that just followed ours. And I think that it is unlikely that Trump can overcome the deficit that he has in Michigan. And when you apportion the undecided voters based on partisan leaning, that actually creeps up to a 50-41% lead, 2 points added to each of them. And one thing that I noticed that kind of jumped out is among those that are undecided, 76% said that they would support a national mask policy requirement. And so that could give you maybe some idea of how those who are still undecided, among probably about 6-7%, may potentially lean as we near the election.
Well, Steve, you just came out with a poll. What are your thoughts on the presidential?
We showed Trump trailing by 10%, 51-41. This is not 2016. When you look back at the 16 election, and I did an extensive analysis of the exit polling that was done, and when it really comes down to is that Trump was able to win Michigan because of the huge votes for both Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. Had they not been on the ticket, I think Hillary Clinton would have won Michigan by 4%. Well, Howie Hawkins and Joe Jorgensen, who are on the ticket this time, do not have the publicity that Stein and Johnson had. Michigan is on a given presidential day is at least 4% Democrat. So I think it's a tough road to hoe. On the other hand, at this point, as it was mentioned, exactly at this point, Trump's was trailing by a larger margin, about 2% worse than he is today in both Michigan and nationally at exactly this time. So he could come back. I think Trump's real problem is that as he's trying to land, he doesn't have a lot of runway left. There's only one more event in which numbers could possibly change, and that's the debate. And the only chance he has there is if he keeps his big mouth shut and hopes that Joe Biden will make a serious mistake or show some cognitive problems that he's been accused of having. So I think that's the biggest problem Trump has is without the debate that was scheduled for the 15th, he's just running out of runway.
How about you, Paul?
You stole my runway analogy. Only you said the land. I'm saying to take off. In order for him to take off, he's got a shorter and shorter runway with every day. I think the more polls we see coming out, we're seeing more where Biden is over 50%. Like Bernie said, the undecideds are low. It's a different year than 2016. Also with COVID-19, it's a completely different year. So many unknowns that are happening. Yes, could he pull one out? Anything can happen in 2 weeks. 2 weeks is a lifetime in politics. But the way this is shaping up, the trend lines are pretty steady. They haven't really moved and fluctuated like they did back in 2016. And, again, we're starting to see where Biden is pulling up above 50% now in a lot of these polls, and even here in Michigan. And that's just too tough to overcome, I think.
Well, thank you. So we've gotten a lot of questions about the U.S. Senate race, because while we're kind of seeing the numbers shake out in the presidential, it seems like the U.S. Senate race keeps getting closer and closer. Do you think that, that the candidates for U.S. Senate aren't as closely tied or accountable to the presidential candidate of their party? Or how do you see the U.S. Senate race shaping up? We want to start with you, Steve?
Well, we have Gary Peters up by 6 points over John James. In that race, remember in 2018, John James outpolled the top of the ticket, Bill Schuette, running against Gretchen Whitmer for governor. Could he still win? Yes, but I think Trump would have to improve his position. If Trump could get within 4 points, then I think John James could win. But I think it's a tough race for James because of the top of the ticket. And Trump is just causing a lot of problems for voters in Oakland County and other areas. Even in Kent County, used to be very strongly Republican because of his personality. And you're tied to the top of the ticket. You can't run away from it. If you run away from Trump as a Republican candidate for any office, then you're going to have the wrath of the Trump supporters who aren't going to vote for you either. So as is always the case in politics, the impact of the top of the ticket is very, very important. And if it gets closer in Michigan, then I think John James can pull it out, but it's got to get a little closer than it is right now.
What about you, Paul? What do you think about the U.S. Senate race?
Well, the one thing I'm noticing, talking to some of the folks behind the scenes, is that the polling in some of the local races is really pushing heavily toward the Democrats, in even some of the congressional races. I think that also pertains to the Senate race as well. Some of these polls that came out recently showed that race was tightening. My gut tells me that it's not as close as some of those polls said it was. And with Steve's poll that just came out today, that's right about in line with what I was thinking it was. But frankly, I talked to someone on Friday that is doing some IVR polling within some of the local districts. And, they're saying that they're getting an underrepresentation of Republicans responding to their surveys, which is, there could be a number of these reasons why. Is it the shy Trumper issue that we talked about in 2016 that never really amounted to much? Or is it folks that are getting a little bit more depressed about the outcome of the presidential race? But given that, they're seeing heavy support for Democrats, and even some rural Republican areas within, say, Oakland County or Washtenaw, they're seeing the numbers breaking heavily toward Democrats. So I think that bodes well for anyone lower on the ticket, lower than the presidential race, which includes the Senate race.
Well, and I know people are chomping at the bit to talk about those lower ballot races too. What are your thoughts on the U.S. Senate race, Bernie?
We had a 4-point lead in our September survey, and obviously Peters was running lower than Biden. However, at that time, James was running above Trump. This time we have a 6-point lead, and it is 45-39, and James is running right at the level where Trump is running. And it should be noted that the negative ads have had an impact on both Peters and James. Both of them have declined in terms of their favorability, and James now has higher unfavorables 39 to 37% than favorables, and Peters has a higher favorability at 43 to 30, but it is lower than what he had in the previous survey, and that's from, I think, the negative ads being run against him. And so negative ads work, and I think that you'll see James losing to Peters. Peters will not run, I think, as strongly as Biden. And another thing I would just like to pipe in for Nate Silver's 538, as this time he has an 88% likelihood nationwide in Biden winning the presidential race. In Michigan, it is a 92% out of 100 likelihood of Biden winning Michigan, and a 79% likelihood that Peters will win the U.S. Senate race in Michigan.
Do you have any overall forecasts for the potential of flipping the U.S. Senate? Kind of putting you on the spot.
Yes, they are looking at, there's a 72% likelihood, according to Nate Silver, of Democrats winning the U.S. Senate. And when you think about what Ted Cruz said yesterday or the day before, he said there's going to be a bloodbath in the U.S. Senate race. And there are, I think, 6 Democrats leading for U.S. Senate. And while everyone expects that Alabama will be lost for Democrats, Arizona, Colorado, Maine, and North Carolina, and I do believe Iowa is a potential, all are potential pickups. And I just saw a new poll out where Jamie Harrison is leading by 1 point over Graham. And whether or not, I still expect South Carolina to go Republican, but new polls out show that that is a potential.
I think it's also, I was just going to say, I think it's also important to watch what the candidates are doing. And you're starting to see Republicans break away from Trump on a national level. So it's a bellwether for bad internal polling.
Yeah, do you think, Paul, that John James has been good at, kind of backing away from that 2,000% behind Trump? Do you think that he's been effective in
this time around? I think he has done a better job of that. Yes.
It's kind of tough when the ads keep talking about.
Yeah, that's true.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching the Lions win yesterday in West Michigan, and I saw a ton of James and Peters ads. So it's definitely a battle of the airwaves over there. Well, let's talk about our congressional seats. It's going to be a whole different ball game in 2022, but we'll talk about that next year. What do you see as the districts that are most likely to flip for the U.S. House?
Potentially, I think that you could see maybe an Upton be in trouble, but I think he's still likely to survive. The same thing in Meyer in the 3rd. I think folks, the Democrats, think they have a shot there, but those are the only 2, and possibly Wahlberg, but I have not been all that impressed with the amount of money that Driscoll has to spend. So I think Wahlberg will survive, and the Democrats, Stephen and Slotkin, should not be in trouble. When we start talking about the State House of Representatives, given the trend line on the potential impact on the base with the presidential, you could see a potential of Democrats maybe winning control of the State House. But in congressional races, probably there's not going to be a flip, but there is a potential.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the 3rd with Fred Upton is potentially there. I think that some of the statements that his opponent made are a little troubling, and obviously they've been hammering those statements that he's made. I think that Skolton is running a very strong campaign against Meyer, but Meyer's father's worth $10 billion, so he certainly should never get outspent. And money is the mother's milk of politics, as they say. It's called the golden rule. He who has gold rules. And I think that at the end of the day, probably Meyer is going to pull that out. He's a veteran. He is also ran a great primary campaign. He delivered food to people. They couldn't go door to door, so they brought food to them. And of course, anytime you're bringing food to people, you're going to make them happy. But I also agree the Slotkin seat and and the Haley Stevens seat are very safe. They're not going to get overturned in this election.
Yeah, I would agree on the third as well. That's where I'm hearing some softness for Republicans, especially in some of the rural areas. Potentially, that's the one.
And it's no accident that the president and the Republicans have spent a lot of time lately in West Michigan, which
Right.
suggests that they're seeing some of the same things in terms of their internal polling.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's jump down to the state house. Paul, what are your thoughts? Do you think the distribution will change significantly, if not completely?
There's a potential. What I'm hearing is that the I guess the lack of excitement that was there at the beginning has gone away, and there is some excitement now among House Democrats to gain control. Fundraising has been unbelievable for them, so they've been raising lots of money, and they're seeing their numbers moving in a positive direction. Will it actually happen? It's hard to say. It's hard to say if it'll actually happen, but the numbers are definitely moving in the right direction.
What are your thoughts on that, Steve? State house races?
Well, I think it's pretty fascinating. The Republicans have some tough seats to battle in Oakland County. Ryan Berman running against Julia Pulver in the Commerce and West Bloomfield area. He's trailing by a couple of points. You move over to Rochester Hills, a seat that was once held by Congressman Mike Bishop, Senate Majority Leader Mike Bishop, State Representative Mike Bishop, is another tight race between Mark Tisdall, the Republican, and Barb Ness, the Democrat. So those are a couple of potential pickups. Also, the Kathy Crawford seat down in Novi. That's another one that's going to be very, very competitive. But the Democrats are on the defense in a couple of areas. Lori Pahutsky in Livonia, in a seat that has always been Republican. Laura Cox, the chair of the Republican Party right now, had that seat prior to Pahutsky winning it when Cox was term limited out. Plus, the Republicans think they have a good chance up in the Saginaw Bay City Midland area, and a couple of races up there, a race against Larry Elder. So they're looking at trying to pick up some seats, but it is going to be very, very close. I can't imagine a scenario by which if the Republicans retain control, it's going to be about 56 seats, 57 seats at best. And of course, it could end up with a 55-55 split again, as we saw back in when Paul Hilligans and Curtis Hertel had shared governance. So, it's going to be a long night as people try to figure out who won those things, or a long couple of days, as it may be.
Absolutely. What about you, Bernie?
An awful lot depends on what the top of the ticket is. If Biden wins by 7 or more points, that could have a profound impact. I can remember 1984, where I was watching the Democratic convention, and Walter Mondale said, "I'm going to raise your taxes," and so is Ronald Reagan. He won't tell you, but I just did. And I was having a scotch and water at the time, and I asked my friend to give me another one, because I said, we just lost Macomb County. And sure enough, we did lose Macomb County, and we had 70 seats at one point, and we dropped down to 57 seats and after the 1984 election. And so I was right about losing a bunch of seats. Fortunately, we didn't lose too many. And it could be the same kind of a situation this year, depending on what Biden wins by.
Yeah, have you seen any, or have there been any changes from what you've seen? I mean, you all have been watching Michigan House races for quite a while. Is there anything that's come out in the time of social distancing and a global pandemic that sticks out to you about, the way campaigns are being run this cycle? Or, has anything changed in terms of, some of the tried and true methods aren't possible right now? Not a lot of door knocking, although some folks are getting out and about. But is there anything that really sticks out to you from this election cycle, particularly in the state house? How campaigns are operating?
Well, I mean, I think the Republicans are knocking on doors far more than Democrats. Not so much in the Tri-County Detroit area, but certainly outstate. They continue to go door to door with the understanding that, look, some people who are concerned just aren't going to open up the door, or they'll talk through the door. But I think they still think that that's more efficient. I think the Democrats are doing it less all over the state than the Republicans, which goes to the way they feel about the issues. You know, you ask a question, what issue is more important to you, the coronavirus or jobs in the economy? And 80% of the Democrats will say the coronavirus, and 80% of the Republicans will say that it's jobs in the economy. You just have this dichotomy of thought on what is the most important issue. So Republicans not as concerned about the coronavirus are, I think, being more aggressive in going to doors than the Democrats.
That's a good point.
Republicans are less concerned about the coronavirus. They're also less concerned about wearing masks. You have, we asked a question about wearing masks, and 28% of Republicans, including 32% of Republican men, said that they don't always wear masks and don't always social distance. And Democrats, almost to the tune of 95%, say that they always wear a mask, and about 12% of independents don't wear a mask. So you have a tremendous difference between how Democrats and Republicans view the coronavirus and the danger that it poses.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point about issues, and you know, whether or not issues are an important factor when people are going to vote this election. And I just don't see it. I think if issues were that important, I think we'd see a lot closer race right here in Michigan, especially when you look at most important problem in the state and people's perceptions, and you add up the what's important to conservatives and what's important to progressives. It's usually right around 50-50 as far as, you know, where they believe, you know, which issues are most important to their side. It would, to me, that would say that the candidates would be closer. They would be right in that 50-50 range. To me, I just think it's all about Trump this election. Don't you guys think so?
Absolutely. This is a Trump election.
Yeah.
As was 2018 a Trump election.
Yeah.
And you heard it here first, folks. If Donald Trump loses the presidency in 2020, look for the Trump for president in 2024 plane to start flying around the country right away. He will not go quietly into the night.
He is not going to be like an old soldier and just fade away. Trust me. He will continue to tweet, and he'll continue to talk, and he will be active. And that's a problem, I think, for the Republican Party going forward.
For
and
sure.
Democrats will be, I think, if they win the U.S. Senate as well as the presidency, they will have control of things for a few years, and Republicans will be, I think, in a difficult position in terms of getting their act together. But ultimately, they will.
Well, the Democrats will do what the Republicans do equally well, is they'll screw it up just as badly in 2 years. And so the one that ought to be concerned about a Republican victory or a Democratic victory in 2020 is Governor Whitmer, because she'll coast to re-election if Trump is re-elected, but she might get a little bit of battle, because there will be, again, the sort of backlash when the Democrats will undoubtedly begin to pack the court. They'll add the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico as states, and that's going to anger a lot of people all over the country. And so you get back into the same problem that you have, that there's no permanent majority ever, even though everyone thinks those permanent majorities are coming. They don't last, because the party in power gets a little greedy with power, and then away you go. The next guys start going after them.
One thing I'd like to understand is, why on earth is Donald Trump picking fights with people that are much more popular than he is? You know, Gretchen Whitmer is in the 60s in terms of her handling of the coronavirus, and he keeps picking on her. And he just came out and started picking on Dr. Fauci, which does not make any sense to me, because his numbers are very, very high in terms of his favorability and how he's perceived with the task force. And why on earth he's picking fights with people that are much more popular than him, I will never know why.
Because he's Donald Trump. That's what he does.
Precisely.
That's what he does.
The double-edged sword of being Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So what do you think the Republican Party, I mean, particularly in Michigan, will look like if the president is unsuccessful in his reelection? What is it still going to be Trump's party? I mean, even if he can still tweet, are they still going to be, you know, I guess, falling in line as much as we've seen? What do you think the Republican Party is going to look like in Michigan if the president loses reelection?
This president has had a greater impact on the party than any president that I've watched in my career. And so this will remain Trump's party for a while. You will see a lot of traditional Republicans, the so-called country club Republicans, hope and pray that they can bring back what they believe is sanity to the process. But the Trumpers are going to be around for a while, and they're going to continue to impact it. And if Trump loses, I would still bet that Trump will be the Republican nominee 4 years from now.
I think it all depends on the final vote count. I mean, whatever the margin is. If it is I heard someone say that, you know, it could be a landslide bigger than anything we've ever seen. And if that's true, if that really does happen, the Republican Party's in shambles. I don't see how they can continue to go down that path and want to win in the future. So I think it all depends on what happens on election day or Thursday.
If Biden wins in places like North Carolina and Iowa, and if he were to somehow win Texas, that would be such an embarrassment to Donald Trump that I think that he would have a difficult time being the nominee in 4 more years. And I think you would have a lot of Republicans denying 3 times before the cock crows that they even heard of him.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about, you know, who they might rally around or what the next move would be. But I guess we can get you on a post-election debrief, and we can talk about that when we have a little bit more concrete information to go from. So let's talk a little bit about the Michigan Supreme Court race. Obviously, it's a nonpartisan election, but I think all of us know that they are partisan nominated. So what do we see going on there? Have you guys been doing any polling around the Supreme Court races? How's it looking for Democrats and Republicans?
We have not been doing any polling on the Supreme Court races. I think public policy polling did some questions, and I haven't seen anybody else that has done any, but they had McCormick coming in top, and then who's
Mary Kelly. Mary
Kelly came in third. The Welch came in second, and Welch was the second choice by I think 12% with Mary Kelly next. I am kind of surprised by that because Kelly is such a popular name, and most people do not know who the candidates are for Michigan Supreme Court unless there's an unbelievable amount of advertising. And so I think right now it is entirely possible that Democrats may pick up a seat, and there would be a then 4-3 Democratic majority on the Supreme Court, given that you had a retirement for the seat when he turned 70 years old.
I did a little polling on the Supreme Court prior to the races really beginning to come forward. And of course, if you remember the Supreme Court, just as if you're a circuit court judge or a district court judge, you get that designation on the ballot. And at the beginning, before the campaigns began, I had Mary McCormick, the Chief Justice, at about 34, Mary Kelly at 29. I had Welch down at about 17 and Brock Schwartzel in single digits. I think that the Democrats have done a good job. Of course, remember in Michigan, you're nominated at party convention, then you run as a nonpartisan. So the two Democratic candidates are Welch and McCormick. They have been running a well-coordinated campaign, letting Democrats know that indeed they're the two Democratic candidates. But I think that you're going to see some big money being spent on behalf of Mary Kelly. Brock Schwartzel, who's an outstanding jurist and a very bright guy, is unfortunately named Brock Schwartzel. And in a year when women seem to be doing a lot better than men, I think that the best chance for the Republican pickup is Mary Kelly. A lot of people I've talked to, Mary Kelly, isn't she on the Supreme Court? Well, Mary Beth Kelly was indeed on the Supreme Court, is not on the court any longer, but she's got the right name. We saw a judge candidate down in Detroit change his name to Hathaway, so he could run as a Hathaway, and undoubtedly he'll probably get elected in Wayne County because that's a popular name there. So I think it's going to be an interesting race. At the end of the day, McCormick will be reelected. You can take that one to the bank, but then it's a matter of whether it'll be Mary Kelly or Elizabeth Welch who wins the other seat.
Yeah, and the incumbency moniker there is so important. And when you have the ballot in front of you, that is, that's a winner right there. So I don't see how she could lose that. She will hold on to her seat. Yeah, and again, I know this sounds like a broken record, but I think a lot of it depends on the top of the ticket and what the turnout actually looks like, and how strong Biden runs in this race, and then that affects all the races down the ticket as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how far down the ticket voters get this year, especially with so many people voting at home, able to look up the races right at their desk or on their kitchen table and cast their ballot that way. So,
yeah.
Well, how about the proposals? We have two proposals on the ballot. Proposal 1 is with the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund to change the funding equation a bit there. And the second one, of course, was referred by the legislature requiring a warrant for a search warrant for electronic data. Let's start with Proposal 1. I was kind of surprised that the Sierra Club and the Detroit Free Press both recently came out against Proposal 1. What do you think is in the cards for Proposal 1, Paul?
That's a good question. I don't know. Have you guys done any polling on either of the proposals?
Anybody?
I have not.
I mean, they both seem innocuous. I'm not sure is there any money being spent on either of them?
Not that I know of.
I think there's a little bit being spent on one from some of the environmental groups, but I haven't seen much out of Proposal 2. I just didn't know if the Detroit Free Press coming out against it and the Sierra Club, a pretty substantial, environmental group, if that would make a difference, or if you think both of them will just kind of slide on through. I think Proposal 2 is pretty straightforward and from the legislature. I don't know if there's any thoughts on that.
Depends on how much money. Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say the same thing you're going to say. Depends how much money is being spent against it.
Right.
Proposal 1 sounds like a good proposal, but if you don't spend a ton of money against it because it sounds reasonable, even environmentalists might think it's a good ballot proposal. And the other one that the legislature puts on is common sense, and I suspect that one will pass. But I mean, normally when in doubt, vote no. But if nobody tells you to vote no, then take a look at them. They sound reasonable. You vote for them.
Yeah, what Steve just said.
Mm-hmm.
Beat me to the punch.
It's all about the money for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, that golden rule I talked about.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, I know that Roger Martin, the partner at our firm here, is very defensive of you guys as pollsters. After 2016, there were a lot of questions about, what some of the polling said. And, do you think some of those questions around the integrity of the polling were founded, or do you think that it was kind of overblown? And, did you change anything about your approach from how you conducted polls in 2016 to what your approach is this year?
Well, let me just say, first of all, the national polling was right.
Yeah.
The national polling showed Hillary Clinton was going to win by, the average was 2.1% on Real Clear Politics, or 3.2%, and she won by 2.1%. Was off by 1%. Here in Michigan, I had it down to 3 points and changed the method by which I collected data the last couple of polls and pushed it back out to 5. Had I stayed the same way, I'd have been around 2 or 3. I didn't. I was not close as I'd like to be, but I think we learned a lot. I screwed up the Democratic primary in 2016, but did a really good job on it this time. Paul and Bernie and I have one thing that we want to do. We want to be right. We may be Democrats or Republicans. Our goal is to get the damn thing right. And
that's true.
and we do the best job we can. It's a tough business. It's a lot tougher than it was 25 years ago or 10 years ago, and it will get tougher. But I think despite all that, we do a pretty darn good job of getting results correct.
I would agree. And looking back to 2016, the one criticism that I think a lot of pollsters have looked at changes to address is to try to deal with education. Many do weighting based on education, so that between 55 and 60% are non-college educated voters, so that you get at more of the Trump type of voters. And the thing is, in our sampling technique, we're able to get generally non-college educated voters in the neighborhood of 55% anyways. And so given that we really haven't needed to do any kind of weighting to get that, but I have noticed much more in terms of the results to make sure that we're in that 43 to 44, 45% college educated range, and that non-college is up in that range. And that way you get more of those men without a college education. However, even this time, you're seeing less support for Trump than what he had in 2016 among some of those groups.
Yeah,
sure are.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, especially on the state level, some of the polls that were done at the end didn't really catch the break of the undecideds because they were so far away from Election Day, and that is key. I mean, especially coming up here, right now, this year, it's so much different that everyone is voting now. But the undecideds are likely the last ones that are going to vote. Typically, they break toward a challenger. In this case, where do they break? There are fewer this time around too. So I think the polling community as a whole has done a good job of fixing what were considered problems back in 2016 by, like Bernie said, doing the weighting as far as education is concerned. What may end up, now that we have, we're in the middle of an expanded electorate, pretty much. The turnout, everyone says turnout's going to be very high in this one. There's a lot of focus now on, as always, on likely voters. And there's some, discussion as to whether or not we're excluding some people from our polls that may not fit in that likely voter category. They're a new voter, or they're someone who would typically say they're not very likely to vote, but are going to show up and vote in this election. We won't know until after the election's over if we caught everyone, but it's something that we're constantly looking at, how to make our sampling better, how to be better at the craft, just what we do. And as Steve said, the ultimate goal here is we have to get it right for our clients. We just have to get it right, and we do. I mean, I think we got it right in 2016. As Steve said, the national polls are right on. It's a matter of tweaking what we do on the statewide level. I think that pays off.
We did a database analysis with our voter file comparing the 2012 election with the 2016 election, and we found there was 620,000 voters who participated in 2012 who did not participate in 2016, including 58,000, just under 58,000 in the city of Detroit. That gives you a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
And most of them were located in Southeast Michigan area. There was also 680,000 voters who voted in 2016 who did not vote in 2012. So there were a lot of new voters, and they were mostly in the rural areas. So Trump did bring a lot of new voters, and I don't get the impression from some of the testing on motivation to vote that those same folks are voting to the extent that they did back in 2016. But you had almost equal numbers not voting or voting anew in 2016. And I think that with the template of stratification from the 2016 election as a base, which most pollsters are using, I think that will help avoid a lot of the problems that they had in 2016.
So for those undecideds, which I think there's consensus that there aren't that many of them, but if it's not jobs in the economy and it's not coronavirus, what are they waiting for? What are they holding on to? What issues do you think they need to learn more about the candidates, or what's preventing them from just casting their ballots today? Because they're able to, but they haven't yet. What's holding undecideds up at this point?
Undecided are much like the independent voters, and they have a myriad of issues that they're concerned about. And so you'd really have to do some micro-targeting to try and identify and address those issues. But you have the top issue among independents is jobs in the economy and restoring the jobs lost because of the coronavirus. Next would be the coronavirus, and then they also respond to the Trump message on violence in the cities. That's number 3 with us, and where you have Democrats citing coronavirus and then racism. You have Republicans citing by like 44%, well over the overall numbers, jobs in the economy, and Trump is winning among those. But then they cite violence in the cities, which is following what Trump has said.
One thing I just read actually this morning was that there's some concern about the ballots, the mail-in ballots, with regard to younger voters. They're not coming back the numbers that they'd like to see. And as far as on the Democratic side, they're seeing a lot of, like we said, 65%, I think someone said 68% of the ballots coming in were targeted Democratic households, but the numbers are much lower among younger voters. Possibly they're in that undecided category, but there's some concern as to whether or not they're actually going to vote in the numbers that we were hoping for.
Traditionally, they have been among what we call the surge voters, engaging late. Now, whether or not that's going to be the case this time, yet to be determined.
So logistically, how has the pandemic impacted the polling industry and how you guys are able to do your job? I mean, more people are at home, but more people are cutting their landlines. So how has that, impacted you over the last 4 years, but then also in this global health crisis that we're living through right now? Has it made it more difficult with calling home lines, or have you had to introduce any other tactics or strategies to try and, get to the sample size that is significant?
We're now at 50% cell phones and cell phone only in terms of our sample. We started out at 20, then it bumped up to 30, and then it was 40 for a while, and then recently we increased that to 50% cell phones. Which
and
makes
it's twice as expensive to make a cell phone completed interview than a landline one. So it's one of the few things in this world that's going up in price as opposed to going down in price.
Right.
You got that straight.
Yes, and I'm not sure if it's so much COVID related. It's technology. It's technology related that are driving our methods. And gosh, can you guys remember when we used to pull samples from Harris Street directories? I mean,
Yes.
that was a long time ago, but technology has taken over and it's pushed us in various directions. And I think that's why you're seeing so many pollsters doing multi-mode surveys, mixing in IVR, mixing in live interviewer, web panels, trying to speak
Texting to
people,
cell phones.
texting to cell phones, just trying to speak to the people where they prefer with the channels they prefer to communicate with. And that's where we're moving. We're going to continue to move in that direction. It's just a constant evolution.
Absolutely. Well, we only have a few minutes left. So I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in socially distanced at home or wherever you may be. Thank you so much to our panelists. I think I'll open it up for any last thoughts you have on this 2 weeks out from the election. How about we start with you, Bernie? Any last thoughts?
Well, I look forward to an election that hopefully all of us are going to be right in terms of our numbers, because the most important thing is not whether you're a Democrat or Republican, but when you're a pollster, whether or not you're right.
Right.
And so I hope we are right, and may the force be with both of you as well.
How about you, Paul? Any last thoughts?
Vote. Everybody get out there and vote. No, I'm right there with Bernie. I hope we're all right. Unfortunately, we all can't be right, but at least the three of us, I hope we're all right. So.
How about you, Steve? Any last thoughts?
No, my thoughts would be the same. I think it's going to be a wild and woolly election, as it
Yeah.
always is. I just feel blessed that I can continue to do this and still do a pretty good job at it. And it's fun. Bernie, you and I and Paul have been doing this for years and years, and hopefully we can keep doing it, and we all get it right. It's going to be another fascinating election. Every election is, it's the most important election ever, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're all very important, and hope everybody votes, and good luck to my colleagues here, Bernie and Paul. May we all get it right this time. I was pissed off for about 2 years after the last election, so.
Also,
you guys are all right in my book. So thank you so much again for joining us. And thanks to everybody who tuned in and submitted questions. We were trying to integrate them a little bit, but if you had any lingering questions that you just need our panelists to answer, feel free to shoot it over to me, and I'll make sure that we can get those answered for you. So like our panelists said, get out there, vote. Voting is happening right now. So let's make it happen. 2 more weeks. Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for hosting it.
thank you. Take care and be safe.
You too, Bernie.
See you, everyone.
Bye.